Is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Restaurants Canada webinar, Emerging with a Profitable Business in 2021. My name is Roberto Sarju, Director of Marketing and Communications here at Restaurants Canada, and I am your moderator. More than ever, it is important that restaurateurs both maximize their revenues and manage the middle of the income statement. Those that are able to successfully navigate the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic will emerge with a more profitable business as they will have controlled all key expenses. In this webinar, we have Jeff Dover, Andrew Waddington, Travis Trainey of FS Strategy, and of course, Jeff Wilson. They'll delve into the opportunities to increase operational performance. This webinar will focus on areas where you may be leaving money on the table, the financial aspects of menu design, purchasing, receiving, and inventory management, as well as production, service, revenue management, and reporting. Effective control systems are equally important to your success as great food and customer service. The webinar will provide key insights to the key food and labor cost control systems a restaurant should have in place and how to effectively implement and use these systems, how restaurateurs can identify and fix problem areas in their operations, and common operational mistakes you may be making and how to ensure your business is following best practices. So please, welcome once again, FS Strategy. If you'd like to follow along online, you can do so. We're actually live tweeting on Twitter at restaurants.ca. And don't forget to catch our Instagram stories at Restaurants Canada on Instagram. If at any time during this webinar you have questions, there is a question and answer box on the right side. Please drop in your questions there. At the end of the webinar, we'll delve into a Q&A section where the gentleman here at FS Strategy will help you answer some of your burning questions that you may have. With that said, I'd like to hand it over to the FS Strategy team. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to see what you have to share.
Great, thank you, Robert. Robert's introduced our team, but we are really happy to continue our relationship with Restaurants Canada. We wanted to talk, if you go to the next slide, please, Travis, talk a little bit about the restaurant business, which we know is challenging, and we promise not to use the words new normal or unprecedented in our presentation. I think we've all heard that enough since March. As Roberto mentioned up front, we don't have to spend any time at all discussing on the implications and on the hardships that the pandemic's caused for the restaurant business. There's tons of challenges, and we applaud, and we're doing our best personally to support the restaurants in our area. We applaud all the efforts and the way that pivot and continue to offer some semblance of normalcy to us while we're locked down. We appreciate that. We just wanted to talk about things in your operations to help you to remain profitable, or to be able to keep the business going. So when the pandemic is behind us, you emerge better, and I think it'll be the ones that survive this will have put into place and taken a look at that whole income statement, the top line in the middle, and be able to emerge this with a much more profitable business than we had going in February 2020. One of the things that we do is operations reviews for restaurants, and we've conducted a ton of these over the years. And what we wanted to show is today is what we've learned and what common mistakes, as Robert said, that we see a lot. And if I essentially we're going to boil it down into one four-word phrase, it's a lack of cost control. It's either a lack of having them or a lack of using them properly. Next slide, please, Travis. So today we're going to just talk about some of the key parts of running a restaurant. First up will be Andrew Waddington. He's going to talk about menu development, and it's so key that your menu is prepared properly, and it's not just what you're offering, it's how you're offering it, and how you're pricing items is key. making sure that you're doing that. And Andrew's going to talk through that, and as well as things that you can make sure you're doing with purchasing and receiving to make sure that you're getting the most out of every dollar. Then Andrew's going to hand it over to Travis, who's going to talk about the inventory controls, issuing, and the production and labor part of the restaurant. We'll then hand it over to Jeff Wilson, who's going to talk about cash control, management analysis, and so forth. And then I'm going to wrap it up, and it's going to include a call to action. So I did mention that this team here does a lot of operational reviews for restaurants, and we were inspired by a webinar that we attended in December about all the great things that restaurant business and hotel business that the hotel Rosanna Carriot Costage Publications put on, giving back to the industry. So what we'd like to do, this call to action, we'd like to come out and help anybody that wants it with a little mini operations review, identify some ways that you can improve your business, some controls that you can put in or maybe use more effectively. And we're not trying to sell anything. This is us giving back to the industry. We're not going to say we need to hire us to do this, need to hire us to do something coming out of it. What we want to do is understand your operation, understand what it is that maybe you're not doing up to industry best practices and or controls that aren't in place, and tell you how to put those into place. And then hopefully the next time we talk to you, it's like, hey, you know what, everything worked and we're doing great. We survived the pandemic and we're better than ever. That's our goal. Then there's no strings attached. So, you know, that's what we want to do. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew, who's going to start with menu development.
Great, thank you, Jeff. I don't have to tell anyone on this call the importance of menu development. I mean, we're in the business, right? And we're all striving for great service and a great customer experience. But at the end of the day, without a menu, we're not a restaurant. If we're not serving food, we're something else. So with menu development being so critical to our businesses, it's important that we're treating this as an ongoing process. This isn't something that we're going to build a menu once, let it sit there, age and get stale over time, and just become something that's never changed, never adapted. There will be certainly dishes that we should never touch, because they are the classics that the people come to our restaurant for. But the menu as a whole, we should be really constantly looking at ways to adapt to the changing input costs, to market trends, pricing of our ingredients, diner preferences, even the delivery methods that we have in place, as we've seen over COVID the last few months. Does our menu make sense for those delivery methods? It's something that's going to benefit. It's going to come across the way we want it to after it's sat in a box for takeout or for delivery, or is it something that only really works on a plate if somebody's in there? So this process is really important, to be constantly analyzing, constantly looking at what we're doing and adapting ourselves to best meet our markets there. If we go through a proper development process, we're not only defining our product and our menu, we're also providing tools that help us manage and control our revenue and cost elements later on down the road through the controls process. Starting out with that, once we've done a conceptual menu, so we've come up with an idea that, you know, we're a brunch restaurant, therefore we're going to do eggs Florentine, and we're going to do this and a pancake entree, whatever it is we're doing. A critical step that's often overlooked is standardizing those recipes. We've got qualified people in our kitchens probably that know how to cook, they know how to make this stuff, but we want to make sure that it's made the same way every time for our customers to come in that door. Not only to provide consistent customer experience, but also provide a quality product and help us have consistent cost control. So we know what that cost should have been for that dish, because we know how it should have been prepared. Once our recipes are standardized, we need to actually get some accurate costs for these recipes. And quite often when we're working with clients, this is something that falls a little bit short. They either have never developed a full comprehensive cost for the recipes in their menu, or they've done it once really accurately and never updated the costs, so it's still prices that don't mean anything anymore, so it's useless. Or they've sort of done it partially, and if it's done partially, it's could be leading you down the wrong. If you're making decisions based on what your costs should be, and those costs are incorrect, that's taking you down the wrong road. So getting that first bit, those standard costs for each of your recipes, is really critical, and it's something that sounds very obvious, but it's something that even with good intentions starting a restaurant, often over time becomes less of a priority as we get busy with the day-to-days, and doesn't get kept up. When we're building our cost recipes, we want to be as thorough as we can. So everything's going to be costed that's going on that plate. We want to make sure that we're applying yields. So customers that we've had, clients we've had that have had costed recipes often forget things like, we're paying for product that we can't use, like the peels of our potatoes or trim on our beef or something like that. We actually had a client that we worked through, and we found the cost for one of their menu items, and while we're going through the model and working how to do it, they said, "Oh, that's perfect. That's what we charge." It's like, no, that's the cost. So having that accurate, understanding what that is, that's critical for making good pricing decisions and other cost elements as we go through. There's a lot of different tools out there and a lot of different ways to come up with a cost estimate, from anything from a simple spreadsheet to sophisticated software that's purpose-built. You should be using what you're comfortable with. And at the end of the day, what's important is that A, you're doing it, B, you're doing it accurately, and C, you're doing it constantly. You're always updating your recipe, your ingredient costs. You always know what those ingredients should be costing you and what those recipes should be costing you, regardless of how you get there. And it needs to be simple. If it's not simple, it's not going to be done over time. It's going to become something that, I'm really slammed today, I'll do it tomorrow. And then it's 2 days and 3 days, and then it's outdated. When we're building our recipes, it can be important to limit the number of ingredients that we're using. So rather than just have each dish has 5 or 6 ingredients that are only good for that dish, we want to, wherever possible, share ingredients across dishes and have common use of those ingredients where it makes sense. There'll be some individual ingredients, obviously, that this dish is a T-bone steak, so T-bone steak's used on this dish only. But wherever we can do it, so we're not seeming like we're just copying across all of our dishes, that we're still being unique in our dishes, we'd like to share those ingredients across. And there's a number of advantages for that. Namely, it saves time when we're doing our ordering and our receiving and tracking our ingredients in inventory, because there's fewer things to report, there's fewer things to count, there's fewer things to inspect and order. But it also can help us save space in our facilities. It can help us reduce our waste because we can move through these products faster. We want to regularly analyze the success and the performance of our menu. And this is part of that cyclical development, ongoing development process. On a regular basis, we want to be looking at what's selling, what are the volumes, what are the sales mix of the menu items that are selling, what was our cost for those items, what's our margin being generated for those items. We can use tools such as menu engineering. There's other optimization tools out there. But at the end of the day, we want to adjust our prices regularly, but strategically, not just, well, we think the prices are going to go up for ingredients by 3% across the board, so we'll just throw 3% on everything. We can get a lot more out of our ingredients. We've had projects where we are actually able to increase margin significantly without increasing the price significantly. And it's because we're able to take a strategic look at which items make sense to increase the price on. Sometimes it's reducing the price or bundling it differently and adjusting that product to make it make more sense. At the end of the day, we want to increase the popularity of the items that make us the most margin when we sell them. We want to increase the contribution of the items that are popular already and find some happy balance in the middle there that keep people coming back and keep some money in our pocket. So Travis, the next slide. Once we have the standards in place and we're ready to, we know what we want to sell in our menu, we can move on to purchasing. And building a good purchasing plan is important, following some standards here. The first thing I like to point out when we're building a new recipe or a menu is make sure that you're only paying for what you need. It's a very romantic and very positive thing to say that we only use the finest ingredients, the finest grade ingredients in a restaurant. But you'll find quite often you don't need that extra level of, I won't say quality, but that extra level of standard. And I'll give you an example and a funny story to go with that. We can buy mushrooms for Canada Fancy, so that's the highest grade of mushrooms that we can get. And that definition means that it's practically free of blemishes. So if I'm having a chef salad or something that wants sliced mushrooms on top of it, that's a good choice for me because I want it to look attractive. It's a product. I benefit from having that higher quality product. If I'm roasting those mushrooms or if I am pureeing them into a soup, do I need that extra fancy? Do I need to be practically free of blemishes? Or can I get away with something that's a slightly lesser grade of product that still does what I need to do? The funny story part to this is I have a friend who started one of the first food co-ops in the Hudson Valley in New York. And when they first opened up, they were bringing in, there was the finest quality local ingredients from local farmers. And they had mushrooms on there. And they were selling them as these gourmet mushrooms. But over a couple of days, if they didn't sell, they started to wither. They started to pick on some blemishes and stuff. Still perfectly edible. In fact, more delicious than they were when they came in without blemishes, because they sort of, I guess, concentrated the flavors a bit as they withered. But no one was buying them because they looked like something was wrong with them. And after a few days of throwing these out, our friend decided that she's going to try renaming them. She loved them. She would take them home when they were going to get thrown out and cook with them. So she renamed them cooking mushrooms. And when people said, "What's a cooking mushroom?" And she explained, "Oh, it's slightly older, tastes a bit better, and it's less expensive." And they sold out instantly, to the point where they are able to start buying lesser grade mushrooms with the intention that they were going to become cooking mushrooms, sell them for the same price, and had a better quality product in the end for less cost to them. So it's important to look at your recipes and do I need that extra level, or I can get a less expensive version of that and get a better product or the same product ahead. Once we understand what it is we want to use for ingredients, we want to make sure that we're clear about what it is we want to use for ingredients. And to do that, you should be creating formal product specifications. So these specifications will be provided in a manual to yourself and to the vendor. So there's no question about what it is exactly you're looking for. A good quality set of product specs would also include acceptable alternatives. We don't want to be left in the dark if the exact product we are asking for isn't available one day. We still want to run our menu. There's probably another product that's close enough on a one-off basis. We don't want to leave that up to our vendor to be guessing about whether they bring us nothing or whether they bring us something else that may or may not be what we want. We want to reduce that friction wherever possible for the purchasing piece. So that product specs with some alternatives is a handy tool. And it also helps our receivers evaluate the products that come in to avoid risk to evaluate the deliveries, determine when and if to reject products and how to do that. Another trick for purchasing, or another best practice, is to reduce the number of vendors that we're ordering from. Whether we're working with a single prime vendor or a limited number of vendors, doing this reduces the ordering and receiving time required, because we're only placing one order instead of 6. It increases the purchase velocity, which gives us better negotiating power with the vendor for pricing. And it eases our ability to meet our minimum drop sizes. So if we have to order a certain amount in order to get the delivery truck to come out there, or maybe we can get the truck out there, but we have to pay additional fees, if we're able to reduce the number of times we have to do that, we're better off. So working with a single vendor wherever possible, or a limited number of vendors, helps us achieve that. Tender for your prime vendors. So even if you can't do a formal tendering process to find the vendor that you want to use as a prime vendor, at the very least, we should be speaking to multiple vendors that have similar products and getting quotes from them, and letting them know that we're getting quotes and that our purchase decisions can be based on those quotes. So either formally or informally, we're letting them know that, don't become complacent. We want relationships with our vendors. We don't want it to be just cut and dry. We want to be able to pick up the phone and they'll be willing to do us a favor if we want, but we don't want to get to a point where they become complacent and they just say, "I know this guy. We're going to get this order next time anyways. We'll just charge whatever we want to charge, or we'll deliver if we want to deliver. It's a shoo-in." We want them always to be trying to impress us, trying to make sure that they're keeping us happy. In addition to this, there's a number of other controls in purchasing. Obviously, with one slide, we're not going to we're going to stay fairly high level, but setting pie levels for our inventory, using accurate sales forecasting and production forecasting is important, and optimizing our delivery frequency and delivery timing. So we don't want deliveries coming in at a time where nobody's available to receive those, and they just sit there and we're not able to check our ingredients and that sort of thing. So delivery frequency, timing, par levels, and accurate sales forecast and production is an important part of the purchasing process as well. And it's something that we would be looking at for you in those operations reviews. Thanks. Next slide. Thanks. So finally, at least for me, we're getting to a point where we've ordered the food, we've purchased the food, and it's coming in the back door. Best practice is to have a qualified designated employee where possible. And I understand that some restaurants are smaller. We have, a couple of people in there and whoever's available. But where possible, we want to have somebody who's receiving that, who understands what it is they're receiving, and what that product should look like and should be. They should be inspecting the delivery, and when they're inspecting the delivery, they should be following the standards or comparing to the standards that we set forth in our specifications manual. And that should be the same specifications manual that we've provided to the vendors, so there's no questions, there's no gray areas. We know what should be coming in. We should be checking the quantity and price. We should be comparing the purchase order to the packing slip, to the invoice, to what we actually received that's in front of us physically. If products are purchased by weight, we shouldn't rely on the label, the weight on the label. We should be weighing these items, especially for high ticket items like proteins. We should be weighing these items on a scale as they come in to make sure we got what we paid for. And we should be checking internal temperatures, especially on temperature sensitive items like dairy, frozen goods, and proteins, to make sure that they arrived at a temperature that's safe. This helps us avoid spoilage, but also food safety concerns. And check for signs of damage and mishandling through delivery. We generally recommend to perform blind receiving. What we mean by blind receiving is that we're checking the physical products first, and then we're looking at what those physical products should have been. As human beings, we're very good at sort of short tracking stuff. So if we see a list that says we should have five cases of something, we look over and there's a pile of things, we say, yeah, that looks like 5 cases, check it off. But if we check how many cases we are and then see how many we're supposed to have, we're more likely to catch discrepancies if there are any. We should have clear procedures for rejecting, addressing shortages, tracking variances, and credit notes. And our vendor should know what that is. If we have a relationship where the vendor has said, okay, my driver's got to go right away. He can't wait around for you to be looking at this stuff. We need something in place that formally that says that we're able to call you back up and you will be good on our call if we say this is not what we asked for, the quantity's wrong, the price was wrong or whatever. So we need something in place to do that if we can't deal with that immediately. But we want to deal with that as soon as possible. Ideally while the driver's still there, if that's possible. And we want those goods to be put away right away. If we're leaving that as a pile in the middle of our kitchen, we've got damage, things get spilled on them or contaminated, the risk of theft goes up significantly, and obviously time temperature abuse for products that are at risk there. So those are the quick 3 steps. Obviously, they're very high level, but those are the best practices, key best practices for the menu development, purchasing, and receiving. And with that, I'll pass this over to Travis.
Thank you, Andrew. So, a number of elements from our operational reviews that we do, certain elements are just getting back to basics and really just understanding that you're doing all the things that you may know yourself that may have slipped through the cracks, or if you have new employees and things like that, there might be some blind spots and things. So some of these checks are things that are well known that we just kind of double check that they're actually being done. So for inventory and issuing, that's just putting in those controls so you're able to track and ensure accuracy of your inventory. And the first one, which is obvious, I'm sure a lot of you know already, is the rotating of stock, that first in, first out method, which is a fairly obvious one. But again, if you have, as Andrew said, sometimes you do try and have a limited number of people who are putting away orders. Same thing with pulling orders. You have different people in and out of those storage rooms and freezers. And sometimes those things get missed. I mean, we did I think it was an operations review for a bar back in 2017. And at the back of their beer fridge, there were some beer bottles from before 1999. Like there were those stubbies, ones you can't even get anymore. So like it is a common and very well-known thing, but just rotating of stock is important. Now, when we talk about transfers, those are something we have to do when you're talking about the restaurant kitchen versus the restaurant bar, and especially if you do catering as well. Doing interdepartmental transfers between those different areas is important, and they must be done at cost, so to those proper centers, just so you can have an accurate costing between the restaurant and the bar, etc. So if you have items coming from the kitchen to the bar for garnishes, or if you have alcohol coming from the bar to the restaurant to be used in cooking, those kind of transfers are important, and they're useful for things like menu development, accurate pricing, as well as your inventory accuracy, so you can just track that flow of food, as well as the cost through your restaurant. And especially if you're doing catering, you need to know if one is being profitably priced, catering versus the internal restaurant, things like that. So having an accurate transfer procedure is important. That's something that's often missed. Another thing is that another basic point here is just key control, and that's just the security of your storage areas, especially your alcohol. Just getting keys back when people leave, changing combinations and things like that are some common things that most places do, but some, might be a little bit more relaxed about, and it's not an issue until it is. So it's good to know that who has the keys, who has access to certain storage areas, and determining if they actually need those keys. So we worked some operational reviews where the first thing we do when we come in is change the locks. It's a good way to see who has the old keys and actually determining if they actually need access to those areas. And then dealing with outdated product. So that'd be just making sure that your inventory is still relevant. A number of menus may rotate, and some items may become obsolete in your storeroom. So after reviewing some operations in the past, we found we had to sell off a number of outdated and obsolete stock that's just sitting in the storage, just are slowly going bad. And obviously space is always a premium in back of house storage. So that's just another basic thing that we like to do. But again, for inventory and issuing, it's just making sure you know where your product is and that it's being rotated properly and that everything is accounted for in the right cost center.
Yeah, and that obsolete, outdated stock, perfect for specials or
Yes.
Something like that, right? It's as long as the chef knows what's there, then he or she can use it and get your money with. We're not getting rid of it when it's way past its
Yeah, that's a good point. Looking at production, Andrew did start to talk about forecasting and PARs as well, but production relates very heavily to forecasting. It's something that you should be doing on an ongoing basis. It should be, especially right now, but it should be a constantly evolving practice that you're doing. And a lot of cooks and chefs or production managers, they do get very good at forecasting if they do it regularly. So you want to improve on those things. It should be constantly being updated week to week. Notes need to be kept on usage as well as different special circumstances that may affect demand. Like rather than just looking at year over year, maybe different local festivals or concerts, sporting events, things like that come up, and noting when those different fluctuations in demand occur is important to note, as well as obviously weekday versus weekend demand. It's always going to be changing, so it's something you need to stay on top of, because you never want to run out of have runouts of stock or prepped items like that, because it affects sales, but also affects customer satisfaction, right? You may not be coming back if the place runs out of that one item that you came there just to get. But it is a balance, of course, because you don't want to have too much item prepped on hand. That could lead to waste or a lack of freshness, reducing quality of your product. I know in the past, it's easy to hear that a lot of staff like to be talked into very easily to over portioning. Like I'll do extra prep today, so I don't have to do as much prep tomorrow, kind of thing. So actually making those production and PAR stock schedules that can be supervised by management is important, so they can be updated against actual sales, so they can be constantly changed, so they can remain accurate and current. That's the only way to actually have that to be an effective tool over time. And you often hear that some chefs just know how much to prepare, they just know the right portion or recipe amount. And that may be true, but that's something that does need to be formalized and followed. So those recipes and as well as those production forecasting can be done accurately, and then so it can also be recreated if that chef moves on or is no longer working at your establishment. So labor cost, I mean, this again does refer to that forecasting piece. You don't want to have a static schedule. So this is the same thing we do every week, Mondays, Tuesdays, everything like that. It does relate very heavily to that forecasting, which is forever changing. We need to be able to look at how we have our schedule and how we're creating that, and how our traffic is changing day to day, as well as if any service issues do occur, if we're overstaffed or understaffed. So you may be making changes to hours of operation as well as your staffing as appropriate. So the hours of operation, of course, are a more long-term change. Like you may have seasonal hours that change as you go, but actual staffing levels can be much more dynamic to reflect today's and versus tomorrow's business level. As long as you're, of course, keeping that in mind, you have to be providing the right level of service. You can't just be looking, well, sales are down, so we have to cut staff down to the bone and just kind of tough it out, because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of providing proper service. So using that sales forecasting and tracking your hourly sales over time, you can identify what times you may want to make additional use of things like third-party delivery without affecting in-house demand. It just is another way to try and keep those labor hours productive as possible. Then, of course, labor control is not just about cutting labor when you're slow, but knowing when to add during those peak periods if you're unable to keep up or provide proper service for a certain extended period of time. So what we like to use is our labor matrix, which could be an important tool for scheduling. And I'll just show you an example of that on the next slide here. So as your demand and your traffic flow can change, especially when things start to open up again, you're not going to have a pre-COVID level of demand. It's not just going to be like before. It's a good opportunity to start new and maybe try a new tool out. You'll have changing demand as you start ramping up your service again and people start going out again. So you want to be able to react to that. So you can use information from your POS to enable you to adapt that way. So as you can see on the screen here, as an operator, you'll need to determine the appropriate number of front and back of house staff members that you use on an hourly basis, and this would be unique to your business for what you, for your operation will act as your minimum number, or your skeleton crew. That'll be your base. You know, if we're just opening, this is how many staff we need on, and then you have to figure out how many covers or how many orders you need to add before you need the other server or the other cook. You know, if you have 20 people an hour, you can maybe cover that with one server. But if you get anything over 20, you need that second server to manage that demand. So just having those different levels like that, you can reference that against your hourly sales to kind of make an outline for what your schedule should look like. And of course, you have to take into account, minimum shifts, like labor laws around minimum 3-hour shifts and things like that. And another thing that we like to have when we're doing a labor matrix example, we often schedule one extra just for growth. Because forecasting is never an exact science. Like I said, it's something you're always changing. And what you want to be able to do with that one extra person is you can wait until you know what kind of a rush you're going to have for lunch or for dinner. And you can wait to just determine if you're going to be keeping or cutting that extra person who may be a hangover shift from the lunch rush into the dinner or what have you. The goal here, obviously, is to not cut staff so service is affected, but to have the right number or a balanced number of staff for the actual demand. So I'll pass it over to Jeff Wilson to talk about cash control.
Thanks, Travis. Andrew and Travis have done a great job talking a lot about the managing sort of the middle part of the income statement, and now we need to talk about the top line for a couple of minutes. You know, we find as we visit operations and do our work helping organizations become more effective, one of the things we often find is that we'll see operators where multiple staff have access to single tills. Cashiers or servers are not allocated necessarily to their own account, and as a result of that, if there is a cash control problem, there's no way of tracking back to see where that problem was. So the first principle here on cash control is to make sure that we're allocating a single till to each person responsible for collecting cash. When it comes to the end of the shift, the cash count should be blind. What that means is, and it's just like Andrew's example of receiving, count first and then check against the reading afterwards. As opposed to the other way around, because given the opportunity, if we make it too easy for people to play games, they may just do that. I'm not suggesting that everybody in the industry is dishonest, far from it, they're not. But there are people who will take advantage of situations if we don't demonstrate that we're watching. Next is separation of duties. So that audit of that cash after the shift is done, that needs to be done by somebody completely independent. So that there is no collusion. And finally, we need to have our cashiers compare inventories on key items to itemized sales, just as a check to make sure that we're managing the things that Travis and Andrew were talking about. Most importantly, we want to make sure that all guests are offered receipts. And you only need to look at some history in various operations to see why that's so important. A number of years ago, our team was called into a hotel in Toronto that we won't name, but we were working in their bar observing operations, and what we found was that bartenders were not entering orders into the point of sale system before they were actually serving the product. And the argument may have been, well, you know, I'm busy, I'll punch it in later, and then that gets forgotten, or they start taking advantage of the situation. So Making sure that cashiers, that bartenders are punching orders in before something is actually issued from the bar. And secondly, making sure that we're presenting guest checks to every guest that is in the restaurant, whether or not they want it or not. And that is particularly important in quick service restaurants. We noticed in this hotel bar that we were working in, servers presenting the same guest check twice for if they served a certain product 2 times and collecting the money, but it's only been rung in once. And so those kinds of things can erode our cash and then create higher cost of sales situation because there's not enough revenue coming into the operation. So now I'd like to travel, Travis, if you can click through to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how to pull all this together at the end of the month. So the last thing anybody wants to hear is, guess what, it's inventory night. And when the shift's over, we got to count everything in the restaurant. But the reality is that is perhaps one of the most critical control systems you're going to implement in your restaurant. And it's easy to forget this. It's easy to say, yeah, whatever, I don't have to take inventory. Inventory should be completed at least on a monthly basis. And when we take inventory, we want to make sure that we're doing it with the person responsible for the cost center, so the chef or the head bartender, as well as having somebody else who's independent there to make sure that the counting is being done honestly and cleanly, and we're checking for any discrepancies. Inventory should be costed and extended with current item costs. We always want to have our inventory at the current market level. So go back to our invoices for the most recent purchase of those items, update the inventory prices, and making sure that we're extending those inventory counts with the current prices to get the current market level pricing. And finally, senior management should be spot checking. And there's lots of stories about how operations leaders have failed to double check back to see if anything's going on, and missing an opportunity to get an inventory error corrected, or in fact any kind of collusion or theft that's going on. So let's be careful. Let's make sure that we're going in and spot checking. And as I said earlier, as soon as staff and personnel see that we are checking things, the likelihood of any untoward behavior certainly declines. And the last thing that's really, really critical is comparing our theoretical cost of sales monthly to our actual cost of sales. And so Andrew talked earlier about making sure that we've got up-to-date costed recipes. Our theoretical cost of sales is fairly easy to calculate by taking our current recipe cost, multiplying that times the number of items actually sold in the period our closing inventory to calculate our actual cost of sales. The difference between those two should be no greater than 1.5 percentage points. 1.5 percentage points is normal waste in our industry. Anything above that means we've got abnormal waste or we have a control problem. And then at that point, if we do experience that, we should be going to weekly inventory and weekly calculation of these values to find out where the issues are and get on top of them. If you wait a month or 2 months or 3 months, which we often see when we do operational reviews, to do inventories, it's too late. We've already lost a lot of money. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Jeff Dover now.
Thanks, Jeff. So just wanted to wrap things up a little bit. So our experience going out and doing operations reviews, and I should say that, we don't get called in to places where everything's running in line. We usually, somebody has identified that there's an issue and we get to come in and do an operation review. But we do find that management controls are often lacking, not done, not utilized properly. And it's so key, and it's so key, especially today when we've got, pressures on revenue, we've got pressures on costs, we've got pressures on everything in our industry. It's so important that we're making sure that everything that we're putting into the business is what we're getting out of it. So the food we're buying, the beverages we're buying, the other supplies we're buying, the cash that is going into the till, and so on. It's really important. Portion controls, Travis mentioned, it's really easy to give somebody a little bit extra, right? But you want to make sure if it's 6 ounces, it's 6 ounces. If it's one blue scoop, it's one blue scoop. Very, very key. And what I found in my experience, counting makes a difference. We had a problem. We had a snack bar at a Sabrina that I was on the board of, and the costs were way out of control. So I said, get them to count before and after the shift, how much they have, right in the itemized sales and all that. And the manager was stressed and said, I can't even review it. I don't have time to review these things. And I said, well, I can do them for you, but I guarantee if you have them start doing the counting, the numbers are going to get better, and the numbers get better because they think somebody's watching that, right? Are going to take, but we've all had our hearts broken. I'm sure you've all had your hearts broken by people that have been taking advantage of restaurants that you've worked in, that you've run, and you have to put these controls in. So I would say, even if you don't have time to do this, counting makes a difference. But I guess I will take that back and say, please take the time to make sure that you have controls in place and that you're using them effectively. We talked about costing recipes, costing inventory, and extending those costs and making sure, is the pricing correct for this item? If the pricing is not correct, can we raise the price? If we can't raise the price, what can we do to this item, to this menu item, to make sure that it's, we can do it at a market price? It's important that you do this regularly, and that's why we go back. And I think if I can give one takeaway, I think it would be that last point that Jeff made: compare your actual cost to your theoretical costs each month. It's so important. Costs are unstable right now. I know Restaurants Canada is trying to do a great job, but there's all kinds of pressure on food costs. We have pressure on labor costs. I don't remember a conversation with a restaurant operator I've ever had where they talk about, yeah, we have too many cooks. We can't get we have way too many good cooks coming in the door, or whatever, right? It's something, the pressures are gonna, we might have them relieved. The pressures are gonna be there. So, that's something that I really, that's my takeaway. And it's hard to set up. It's hard to set up comparing the first time, comparing theoretical cost to actual cost. But once you've set it up, it's easy to do every month, right? You know how to go and pull off an itemized sales report. You've got your costed recipes. You've set it up a way to cost these recipes and update them. You know what your last invoice was from your broadliner. Boom, you can go and you can do it. I think that would be a key. Then, there's a few costs that we can control, right? And we've got to make sure we're doing food costs properly. And our labor costs, we want to make sure, and as Travis said, when we're looking at labor, we don't want to cut down the service level below where we want to go. Like, we want to make sure we provide the good service. We just don't want to have that extra labor. And you need the whole team there when the doors open, or you never get busy till 11:30, right? You need everybody to come in right at the start of dinner, or people aren't going to be coming in. So that sort of thing. And I guess as Roberto said in the introduction, by not using management controls, you're leaving money on the table. And if you effectively manage that middle of the income statement, maybe you can lower prices and still be more profitable. But definitely managing the middle of the statement has a big impact on the bottom line. So the other thing is you need that capital. You need to be making sure you're making enough that you're setting aside capital for that refresh and that renewal that you go. There's a reason the chains want restaurants renewed every 7-8 years. You should be thinking about that. We definitely see what it does for the top line when there's a refresh at the front of house. So I guess our takeaways are it's a lot of work to run a restaurant properly. It's not rocket science to run a restaurant properly. If you use the typical food and labor controls and you make use of those tools, your operation will run a lot more effectively. The one example, Andrew and I were in an operation a few years ago, and we found that people were selling, it was in a Jewish neighborhood, and they were selling brisket sandwiches on Wednesdays for less than it cost for the brisket. And I'm like, he's better off standing at the door giving a toonie out and telling them to go next door and get their brisket sandwich. You got to be on top of this thing, and you got to be doing it, and you got to find time. And I know the days are busy, but you really got to just take a few hours to be the manager of the restaurant and go on and do that. Can we just go to that next slide, Travis? It's the call to action. So I said up front that we want to give back to the industry, and we'd like to spend some time with you and conduct a web interview. We finally take about 2 hours. We ask questions. We get you to share with us some forms. We get you to share with us some reports. And we identify anywhere where maybe your restaurant or restaurants aren't operating up to industry best practices. And when we identify any of those areas, if we don't identify anything, that's great. You're good. You're doing everything. But where we identify those areas, we will give you the action steps to take to bring those areas up to the best practice. It might be inserting a type of control. It might be reviewing information. We'll tell you how to do it, and you can do it yourself. We're not going to try and sell you consulting services, like I said up front. We'll say, this is what you need to do. This is how you do it. And let you go. And then if you want to follow up with questions or anything like that, by all means, we're not gonna, there's no fees that we're gonna charge you to call back and say, hey, I tried this, it's not working, or this is the results, how do I interpret it? We want, you know, all four of us are crushed when we see, you know, some of our favorite places that have closed permanently because of the pandemic. I mean, you know, restaurants, it's a tough business. You all know that. We see the ops reports that Restaurants Canada goes and how thin those margins are, and those are the averages. So some, you know, half the restaurants by definition are doing worse than those very thin margins. We want you all to be successful. We want you to be there. We're dying to come and sit in the dining room and enjoy, and I'm sure you're all dying to serve us. So please take us up on the offer. So we'll do a short meeting with you, a couple hours. If we have a consultant in the market and you're open, we can come in and do some observations and see how the production's going and all that, and maybe make some other suggestions, and then just provide you a short report. This is what you need to do, and this is how to do it. And then I'll include our contact information on there and for any follow-up chances, or any questions or discussion that you want to have. And anyway, I just say, please take us up on this offer. We do want to give back to the industry. Travis, one more slide, I think. Yeah, we want to turn it back over to Roberto, but just before we do, if you want to take us up on those operations review, we're going to leave Travis's email up here for the rest of the presentation. Reach out to Travis. We're gonna, I know Ontario is currently a state of emergency to February 11th. We're gonna take bookings on a first come, first served basis until right up to February 11th. We're hoping nothing gets extended after that, but we'll do it on a week basis after that. And just one more time, I'll say, please reach out to us if you think we can help at all, or you just wanna have clarity in your own mind that you're running everything the way that it should. I guess we've never had one of these where we haven't found something that can help a restaurant improve the operations. Anyway, that's it. We appreciate you're hanging on and listening and giving us an hour of your day. And I'm going to turn it over to Roberto. If there's any questions that come in, I'm sure we'd be happy to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you to the entire panel. I think that was incredibly insightful. We do have some great questions that came in, but I do want to reiterate, take advantage of this opportunity. Like Jeff said, we will leave it up on the screen. So if you're looking for that extra assistant, extra help, extra set of eyes on your business as you're going through what you're going through today, please don't hesitate to reach out. And you talk about management controls, Jeff, and it reminds me of that quote, and I'm, similar, but you can manage what you manage, you can measure, and what you can measure, you can improve, right? So I think, the entire presentation speaks to that specifically. So I thought that was a great way to wrap it up. A couple questions came through here that I thought are really good, and actually more one comment, which is really interesting. And this person's been in the industry longer than I know many of us have been alive who are on this webinar today. But I've had my own restaurant for 4 years now and spent approximately 50 years in the industry. I used to take inventory monthly, but since I went to live inventory, I have not needed to take inventory monthly. I have the ability now to compare my live inventory usage to the purchases I make, that I'm able to manage food inventory much closely. So I don't know how many clients you have that may be doing that, but from this, I just wanted to share that comment with 50-year vet of the industry. Live inventory, if you have the means, maybe something to take a look at. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that. Any of your clients use that in regards to that?
Maybe I'll start off on that. Certainly technology has improved, right? We used to do inventory on a Saturday night, which made no sense, really, if you ask me. Yeah, definitely. I think technology has improved, and it's made a lot of these things easier. One of the silver linings, if you will, of the pandemic is the embracing of technology by the industry and using it to make things better. So yeah, the only thing I would say is you still need to check it every once in a while to make sure that you can spot check key items, or you can spot check the inventory to make sure that what the system says you have is what you have. But that's great. Just touching back on that actual to theoretical comparison, I think that's a key thing. And like I said, I don't want to be a dead horse, but I think if you take one thing away from that, please do it. I know it's hard to set up, but one restaurant I worked at, we do the comparison every month, and we were outside that 1.5 percentage point ratio. We'd go to weekly, and everybody hated doing weekly inventories. It's kind of related to the comment, Roberto. So we'd have to do it weekly till we got everything back in line. When I was doing asset management with Fairmont hotels a few years ago, and we'd have these budgeted food costs that we were supposed to meet, and if everything the answer was to raise prices. And I don't know if you've had a breakfast at Fairmont, but it kind of goes up. And while I was there, that it was a real change to, well, what should the food cost be? We know what the budget is. What should the food cost be? And then we started doing the theoretical food cost calculations. So you can make use of those technology tools, but you do have to spot check them.
And really great segue to a couple other questions we have. One, Jeff Wilson, do you mind repeating the formula for the theoretical versus actual cost of sales?
Okay. All right. So to calculate your theoretical, and actually maybe what we can do is put together another slide and pass that on to you, Roberto, on this so that you can distribute it.
That's
so theoretical cost of sales, you take your recipe costs as calculated using the current prices from your suppliers, calculate your recipe cost, multiply that times your actual unit sales for the period, whether that's a week or a month or whatever it is, so that you get a theoretical cost of sales for that menu item. Add those all up for every menu item, so you have a total theoretical cost of sales for the restaurant. and then compare that to your actual cost of sales. Actual cost of sales is calculated typically at the end of the month by taking and valuing your inventory. You start with your opening inventory that you took the previous month. You add all your purchases to that. Then you deduct the value of your closing inventory. That will tell you your actual cost of sales for the month. Compare the actual cost of sales to the theoretical cost of sales, and the difference should be no more than 1.5 percentage points.
Mm.
And just jumping in, the key to that, of course, is the recipes are costed up to date, and when you're doing your inventory extensions for the opening and closing inventory, those are up to date as well, right? Garbage in equals garbage out, so you have it done, but it's the theoretical cost of sales, like I said, is hard to set up the first time. After your first period, it's very little work to do it each month.
And the other question in regards to that was, should theoretical not be 1 to 1.5% less than actual, not greater?
No, it should be greater, because the theoretical food cost assumes that there was no waste at all in your restaurant, right? And there's always going to be waste. There's going to be orders that are returned by customers. There's going to be food that gets dropped. There's going to be, the higher than the theoretical.
Right.
If it's less, it means that you have if theoretical is less than actual, you're not delivering what you're supposed to be delivering to your customers, right? So maybe you're making hamburger patties that are supposed to be 6 ounces and you're making them 5 ounces. You're not doing the proper portioning or something like that. And if it's less, it's concerning as well as if it's greater.
At the beginning, we talked about software to file and cost recipes and so on. You mentioned something that's simple and easy to use. Do you have any recommended platform or software that you guys recommend to your clients?
Yeah, so I'm going to be careful not to do a self-plug here, but we had the same issue that the person who asked the question was hinting at there. There's a lot of different softwares out there. There's ones that are in the cloud. There's ones that you download. There's free ones. There's complex ones. There's ones that link into your inventory system, so you have to put in enter in your inventory, your invoice values each time they come in, and all of them are fantastic depending on the person who's using them and what they want to do. If you've got someone who you want to pay to put in your invoice values every day and you can keep on top of that, that's fantastic. What we found with our clients was that when we moved from client to client, their needs were slightly different and their opportunities were slightly different. We use an Excel model. It's not just straight up Excel, though. We sort of Excel on steroids. We've put in a bunch of functionality. I think the better way to approach what the right software is would be a list of features that you need to have. And that is, I think the best ones would be to have a centralized ingredient list, so you can change all your prices in one place. Nested recipes. So if I have a spice mix that's used by 15 different recipes and I change that spice mix, I change it once and it flows through the entire thing. These sorts of the ability to do the yield cost and the ability to convert between dissimilar units of measure, I think, is also important. It's something that we try to put in there. All of us, no matter how good we are at math, if we've got to convert between pounds and tablespoons with something, we're going to make a mistake. So the more we can do that, make our standardized recipes use units of measure that are practical on the line, and be able to use that same recipe in our cost model. That's maybe something we purchase by the kilo or by the pound, and having a system that's able to convert between those two once we give a little bit of extra information. Those 4 tips, I think, if you've got that, that's the bare bone minimum. There's a lot of stuff out there that does that and more, and there's a lot of stuff out there that does less. It really comes down to how much work you want to put into it, or able to.
A way to keep the prices updated is to use the tools provided by your broadline distributor. so I'd rather people do that than nothing. The concerns with that is it makes it even harder to switch distributors if someone might be better for you. And then there's all the products that you purchase from other suppliers, secondary suppliers that aren't in there, and making sure that that gets done. So, you know, I guess, Roberto, if somebody wanted to reach out to Andrew and explain the situation, I'm sure he could provide a more detailed answer, but
I know the person asking. I can call.
Perfect. And I know we're at the top of the hour, but I do want to get to this one. You know, you guys have probably seen the full gamut of what's happened here across Canada the last 10 months. But, you know, besides curbside delivery, you know, have you heard of any other ideas? What are some interesting things that you've seen some people do? You know, we've seen some people do retail shifts. We've seen pop-ups. You know, anything interesting that you've seen? I hate to use the word, like you said, pivot at the beginning. You know, it's one of those words that's been overused, but we have seen a lot of that in the industry overall. So wanted to share, you know, has there anything that you've seen maybe certain businesses be successful in the way they've had to pivot?
Anyone want to jump in there?
Yeah, I'll go. So a couple thoughts. Yeah, curbside pickup for sure is something that we've seen operators really starting to adopt. And as Andrew said, taking a look at the packaging to make sure that our menu items make sense and the packaging sustains the items until they reach the guest. That's becoming more and more important, because the guest actually looks at the quality when it arrives and compares that to the way the quality used to be in the restaurant when we could go, and says, nah, it's not as hot, or it doesn't taste as good, or whatever. So we got to perfect that curbside delivery system. And I think a lot of operators have done a good job of that. I think the other thing that we're seeing more and more of are ghost kitchens and that sort of operation. If the participants are not familiar with that, it's the idea of creating a restaurant that doesn't have a ghost kitchen and use a delivery service across all of those brands. So that's consolidating operating costs. That's making an effective delivery system. It's consolidating capital costs. So that may not be applicable to everybody, but it's certainly an interesting way of going to market. Even if you're in an independent, you've got 2 or 3 concepts, consolidating down into one location and running your 3 concepts as a ghost kitchen out of that one location could be a significant advantage to you from a cost standpoint.
Jeff, just to add on to that, I have heard of restaurants who are unsure about how they're going to come out of the COVID issue, whether their concept's still going to be relevant or that, and want to play around with new menu ideas and new concepts. You can do that you can do that out of your own kitchen. You can be your own test brand and try a new menu out on your same customers without them knowing, without injuring your existing brand now, and make a decision later on based on data of whether that's worth opening a new concept, adapting your current concept, or just letting that new concept idea go away once you don't need it anymore. So it gives an opportunity to play.
Nope, that's great. Some great heads up there. So, you know, we are a little bit past the top of the hour. To the guys over at FS Strategy, you know, thank you all for sharing your insight. And for those of you who tuned in today, please, you know, again, the offer still stands, the Pro Bono Ops Review. You have all the details there. This webinar is being recorded and will be up within 48 hours, and you'll have the contact details there again. Once again, to the entire panel, thank you for sharing your insights, and to those who took the time out today to join us, really appreciate you taking the time, and stay safe out there, and we'll get through this. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Roberto at the end, but I guess I'll just say, I think he was going to say stay safe and you know, good luck. And you know, from the 4 of us on our team, we can't wait to get into your dining rooms again, and we'll support you until then through takeout and delivery.